On today's show, we'll be discussing school safety and alternative solutions for neurodiverse students. You won't want to miss it. Hello, Naked Parent Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Naked Parent Podcast. My name is Chad Ratliff, and I'm your host. But before I introduce you to our guests today, let me start by sharing our community's code. Naked Parent Nation is a worldwide community of parents raising children with all kinds of needs. We come together to share our naked truths, support our fellow parents, and inspire the inner growth that each of us needs to build the life and family of our dreams. For the parents that are struggling, we want you to know that we will love you until you can love yourself. For your children, we pray and send power from our collective group. As we come to understand our divine nature, we realize that there's no need to feel sorry for ourselves, be angry, or feel lack. We come to understand that our feelings of limitation and separation are only in our minds. Through self-realization, we expand our consciousness so that the challenges that perplex us today dissipate one by one until we're able to see and experience gratitude and beauty in everything just as it is. We have the power to create any kind of life we want for ourselves and our families. We do this by living in the naked present moment, one day at a time. Esther and Jerry Hicks call it the science of deliberation, and we call it the answer to all of our prayers. So let's continue our journey as individuals and parents with a short breathing exercise and meditation. So if you'll sit up straight, spine erect, and then softly close your eyes and raise your gaze to that spot between your eyebrows. And just be and hear what's around you and watch your thoughts that go across your mind and not judge. And we're going to take a deep breath in. We're going to clench our fist and tighten our muscles, and we're going to hold it for a minute, and then we're going to exhale and release and relax. And we're going to do that 3 times. Okay? So inhale, tense. Hold. Exhale, relax. Inhale, tense. Hold. Exhale, relax. And then inhale, tense. And hold it a little longer this time. And exhale, let it go. And now one more time without tensing, just inhale and hold. And then exhale, relax. So while you sit in meditation with your eyes still closed, I'll read a short prayer before we get to our show. Heavenly Mother, Father, friend, Great Spirit, divine consciousness, wondrous nature, and saints of all religions, we come together as brothers and sisters on a similar quest to better understand ourselves, our divine calling, and how to be the best version of ourselves and parents for our children. We ask for guidance and the ability to accept life on life's terms. May each listener feel an inner sense of peace and calm in our hearts today. May we feel love and spread love. Om, peace, amen. Amen. So I'm super excited to introduce everybody in Naked Parent Nation to Jeff Schneider. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let me tell our listeners a little bit more about you. You were born on March 27th, 1989 in Providence, Rhode Island, and you've lived your entire life in Seekonk, Massachusetts. You were diagnosed with autism in 1990, and ever since then, you've achieved multiple successes in education, long-term employment, independent living, and speaking and panel engagements. How awesome. Welcome again to the show. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for having me and allow me to share my experience with all of you.
We're excited to hear because you, just from your brief bio, you set that standard for what we're as individuals trying to achieve, and as parents for our children, our hopes and dreams for our children are to achieve these things that I look forward to getting to learn a little bit more about. But can you start by like rewinding back to some of your earliest memories and how the diagnosis and just being neurodiverse played out in your early childhood?
As you mentioned, I was first diagnosed on the autism spectrum in December of 1990. I was 21 months old at the time of my diagnosis, and for the longest time, I didn't even know I had autism until I was about 9, when Nick News came to my house and both interviewed me and filmed me as part of a story they were doing on being diagnosed with autism, and that's how I first learned of my neurodiverse condition. But prior to that, I knew that I was always very, very different. Not interacting very well with my peers, and I was actually in special education programs. I started off going to specialized schools in 1992 and 1993, and then I first came to Seekonk in after that, and then I actually got into the Seekonk public school system in 1994, and then upon my graduation in 2007, I became the first student with autism to have completed pre-K through grade 12 without coming from other towns or school districts. So I really kind of set a very high bar when it comes to being neurodiverse and succeeding the way I did.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. If you listening to you, nobody would know that you have any neurodiversity. Your speech is impeccable. How else when you say that you felt like some things were different, how can you explain a little more about what maybe felt a little different?
Well, for one thing, I was first of all, I was nonverbal until I was 4 years old. I didn't start talking until then, and not being able to talk was very, very difficult for me because I couldn't really communicate the way that normal kids my age would communicate. So that was kind of difficult. And during that time, my folks tried to figure out what autism is, and I was actually, at the time when I was diagnosed, the ratio of getting diagnosed with autism was 1 in 10,000. Now it's 1 in 44. So, back then, autism was kind of, like the diamond in the rough when it comes to the diagnosis of it. And of course, at that time, autism was more or less connected with the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. And then, of course, there was Dr. Temple Grandin. And my folks have actually had the pleasure and the opportunity to meet Dr. Grandin when I was younger, and through her, and and they actually talked about who I am and stuff, and what I was going through. And then, of course, and then also during that time, I was put in integration therapy, and occupational therapy, and the only thing that I wasn't thrown into was applied behavior analysis, and I actually wasn't qualified for that level. So, and then of course I've but despite all that, I eventually achieved multiple successes, including getting my own apartment in 2015. Wow. So I've been living on my own for about 7 years now.
Wow. When you look back at your childhood, would you say it was a happy childhood? Was it a difficult childhood? How do you sum up your childhood?
I would say it was difficult at times, in regards that, I reacted to things, in certain ways that, I kind of, wish I regretted. And, the trouble with, one of the parts and parcels of being neurodiverse is that I have sensory processing disorder. So I couldn't really, process, certain situations and certain things, you know, properly. And that was probably one of the more, difficult aspects. But I mean, as I got older, and began to, be more understanding of the world around me, some of that just kind of went away. And I don't know if it was because of, growing up, neurodiverse, maybe it was because of age and wisdom and stuff. But, over time, I really kind of started to grow and started to accept myself for who I really am. And, I'm taking that, taking my story and, sharing it, especially now as the diagnosis ratio is 1 in 44.
And we're so grateful that you are. How um, that's amazing. It's amazing uh, to take that responsibility yourself and say that how you were seeing the world around you. I think that's amazing. How and I think the Rain Man analysis is. I just want to bring up a point on that is interesting because my son's very low functioning, and I remember when he was younger, and people would say, I mean, he's wearing a diaper and some things that aren't very developed, and they say, oh, everybody's with autism has some kind of genius, and meanwhile we're like cleaning feces off the wall and stuff like that, and it's challenging to when people are thinking that your kid's going to be the next Beethoven because they have autism and there's such a wide spectrum. Did you know other neurodiverse kids growing up in school?
I've actually, most of the students that I interacted with were on IEPs or had learning disabilities, and it wasn't until 2003 when I really started when I founded a hangout with my psychologist for individuals on the autism spectrum, and that's how I really started, interacting more with with peers that are also on the autism spectrum, and getting a chance to kind of yearning for that for that type of interaction, because talking with neurotypical kids my age was in a way kind of difficult because they had interests that didn't really match up to my interests. I mean, sure, we have, in the 90s with the Pokemon, fad that was going on at that time. So I kind of had that, kind of low key interest in Pokemon the same way as they do. And then and of course, I mean, while everybody was big on, like, you know, baseball and football. I mean, of course, I'm a football fan now, but back when I was a kid, I was big into NASCAR, and you know, a lot of people, a lot of peers my age, weren't big into NASCAR. They were, big into those into the other, sports that everybody gets involved with. So, I mean, that was kind of the differential, in my standings. So,
And you bring up how we all crave human interaction. Um, Sometimes I think like my son, even my daughter, they they sometimes seem like they don't want that interaction or that connection or that hug. Um, is it possible, or was it? Did you have anything like this where um, your actions maybe didn't show what your heart really craved? Am I making sense, or I don't know if I'm making?
I think it's more. I think that's that kind of thing, because I think what a lot of parents worry the most in terms of you know I would say there was probably a little bit of forced interaction from my family, because both my mom and dad come from very large families, um, so there was always that frequent forced interaction, if you will, of being around families that are very um, being around families that you don't really interact with, and sometimes I think the problem I think that a lot of parents face is that just because we're just because your child isn't very interactive with others around them, it doesn't mean that they're going to be antisocial, or being doing things their own way. They are doing things their own way, but they want to try to get there. But just because they're trying to just because they think they're being antisocial doesn't mean they're not. They're just trying to do things. They're going to take those steps toward human interaction in their own time, and you can't force human interaction. You can't force interaction on someone who's neurodiverse, because that could be extremely damaging and very and very bothersome to neurodiverse individuals.
I think that's a great. That's great for our listeners and for myself to hear. Um, let's rewind back to this hangout. You said that you founded a hangout with your psychologist. Are you talking about like a place where you guys can meet and hang out? Or
Yeah, yes, I mean, it started off, at my psychologist's office, and then about 9 years ago, um, we evolved it to an adult hangout. That's not in the office per se, but at the bowling alley, or the billiards hall, or at a mini golf course. So we kind of so we branched out outside the office at that time, and it's still going strong 9 years later.
how cool. Did your psychologist play an important role in your life or upbringing?
Yes, I first met my psychologist in 2003, which was about almost 20 years ago, and at that time, it gave me someone to talk to other than my folks, and because I couldn't really understand what was going on around me at that time. I mean, sure, I matured and developed and all that stuff, but it was very hard for me to kind of fully understand. So going to my psychologist gave me the opportunity to kind of have someone to talk to, and solve my issues at my own pace. And then, of course, I also ended up, also added a psychiatrist to the mix. But so that was more on the medicational aspect. But the psychologist aspect was like being more was like solving ongoing issues and all that.
Yeah, it sounds like an awesome relationship. And then you said it was it 9 years old when that show showed up at your door?
Yes. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Nick News, Nick News was that news show back in the '90s. Nickelodeon had a news show called Nick News with Linda Ellerby, and among the stories they did was on autism, and that's how again I first learned of my diagnosis. So I mean, if you grew up in the '90s like I did, you'll remember Nick News. But for those of you who aren't really familiar, that was what it was like back at that time.
And was it your parents who connected you with Nick News, or
Honestly, I'm not really sure. I mean, it's still kind of a bit of a mystery to me. So, but
is that
either way, I was featured.
what was that experience like? I mean, how did you take the news? I mean,
Well, they had a camera crew that came from Orlando, and they filmed me, doing my everyday things, and um, of course, I was big into NASCAR, so I would always, do like mock races on the kitchen table. So that's what I did, and you know, that, and so they filmed me doing that, and just doing that sort of thing. So I mean, it was but I think had it not been for Nick News filming me for the autism segment, I probably wouldn't even know of my diagnosis until later in life. I mean, maybe my folks could have kept the diagnosis from me because they probably couldn't figure out how to explain it, how to explain my diagnosis. So that was really the that was kind of the that was kind of the difficult mindset in that regard. But yeah, I mean that was
I mean, were you shocked, or were you in denial, or did it make you sad, or did it make you feel like it started to now this explains some things that
I
didn't make
wasn't really in denial, but I wasn't really in denial, but I really kind of found out, why I was acting differently the way other kids were. I mean, it was kind of more of a, you know, identity, more of a self, realization that, this is why I am what I am. So that's really how I've embraced that ideology.
and at that young age where did it did it make you feel sad or different, or it didn't have any negative?
It didn't have any negative impact
Okay.
on me because I think I wasn't I was who I was, and that was pretty much the way it was meant to be, and and since and part of it, and I look becoming having become a full time advocate for the past 3 years. I look back on Nick News and I say to myself, you know, that's just, had it not been for Nick, again, had it not been for Nick News, I probably would not have, I wouldn't have known about my autism diagnosis in the manner that, I learned it. So
Have you always been this kind of self um, secure with yourself? I mean, there's a lot of people that aren't considered neurodiverse that aren't in acceptance of who they are and how they act. And it sounds like from a young age, it sounds like you were in acceptance that this is who I am. Can you tell us more about that?
yes, well, I mean, there are one thing I always tell people about autism is that I always try to view autism more as a blessing rather than a curse. I mean, you know, there are probably some families that, view autism as a curse because it's affected their, child, and in a way it affects them, how they're going to succeed in life. But one thing I always tell people is that it's better to focus on the blessings, because just because we have a neurodiverse condition like autism, it doesn't mean that we can, make a great impact. We make the impact the way that we want, that people expect us to impact the world. I mean, there are, mountains that are very that are meant to be, moved, and it's like Dr. Seuss says in Oh the Place You'll Go, that you'll move mountains and you'll be successful 98% indeed. So really, it's more about focusing on the blessings and the milestones, and you know and the key thing is that we all move at our own pace, and if we move when we move at our own pace, in we'll succeed at the levels that we want to that we can be successful at.
Wow, that was beautifully said. Very well said. Did you have people around you that helped you focus on the blessings and positivity, or is that something that you had to um, generate
I
yourself?
I definitely had a lot of people that helped me focus on the blessings. Particularly when I was in I was very fortunate to have been involved as a student at Seekonk Public Schools, because Seekonk, I in recent years, has become more focused on DEI in terms of diversity, equality, and inclusion. And because of my because I went to school in the system, prior to my involvement as a student, they didn't have a lot of specialized educational programs that they do now. And because of my involvement, they have those programs that a lot of students can that students like me can have an opportunity to thrive and grow in the level that they're in. And and of course, and recently, Seekonk was recognized by the Special Olympics as one achievement. And then they also started a transitions academy, because another one of my fortes is helping people with transitioning from high school to the real world. And because I struggled, because my transitioning was very rough, it's been my it's been one of my fortes is helping people with transitioning from the security of high school to the real world, in terms of getting a job, going to college, driving a car if they want to. So that's real. So there's two parts. There's the school part, and then there's the transitioning part. So that's really where my focus as an advocate lie, in terms of you know going what is life like after high school, you know and what's life like during school, and being on an IEP, and that sort of thing. So that's really where my main focus is as an advocate.
That's awesome. And so can you share some of what made the transition difficult for you, and maybe some things that you were able to do or learn or understand to overcome those?
Well, I think the first thing is that I didn't start preparing for the transitioning when I was still in high school. I actually ended up getting I actually ended up preparing for the transition while I was out of high school. And in terms of getting a j- get I didn't get my first paying job until I was out of high school. And looking back, I say to myself, if I had gotten a paid job while I was still in high school, or being prepared to transition while I was still in high school, then maybe my transition probably would have been a lot more smoother than it would have been. And and of course, I did some volunteering at my town's public library, sophomore and junior year of high school, but that was it. I mean, I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't I was just doing this for I was just volunteering. And you know and one thing I try to preach to schools, one thing I try to preach to people connected in education and transitioning and vocational, is to always try to start the transition process while the child is still in high school. Maybe during freshman and sophomore years, maybe have the student start do like volunteering, just to gain experience. And then when the student reaches junior or senior year, then start getting experience with paid work, going through a job interview process, doing all that while you were still in doing all that while you're still in school. And and not having to wait until you're 18 years old, because then you can because then just because you're 18 doesn't mean you automatically get go into the transition period. And I think also a lot of parents can be in denial that their child doesn't need to prepare for transitioning while they're still in high school. They think it's more about the child focusing on the education, which I say that I don't believe that it's a good idea to wait until the child gets out of high school, gets the diploma, and goes off into the real world. It's more about taking that step by step approach to successfully getting a good transition. And then if the student takes that step by step approach, then they'll have a much smoother transition than when the time comes for them to get out of high school.
I like that. So plan ahead, and give yourself enough time to be successful. Um, it's awesome to hear the impact that you've made on the school and creating new programs. Can you tell us some of the things? Does anything stand out, from early on, things in school programs that weren't great for people on the spectrum or with sensory processing disorder, and then maybe some things that have changed to be more accommodating? Are there any of those things that stand out?
Well, definitely. One thing that I really struggle with was school safety drills. School safety drills were probably my biggest challenge when I was in school, particularly with fire drills, because of my sensory issues. Um, Whenever there was a fire drill, it was very traumatizing. It was very sensory overloading. And then of course then there's the matter of and then lockdown down drills was another stressful, intenseful situation that I had to go through. And school safety drills is another one of my big fortes, because I struggled a lot with school safety drills. I mean, it was even in my IEP that I would get taken out of the building before they would, pull the alarm, or if we're going to have like a lockdown drill or a bus evacuation drill, I would get advance notice. And one thing I try to, say to schools is that just because some schools think that the child is trying to get out of doing the drill because they're scared, and well, they are scared, but they want to but I'm trying to help soften the blow by getting help by by advocating that special ed students who have a fear of school safety drills get the advance notice that they need, because then when the time comes they'll have a much smoother transition. And some of the and of course, I get that the school is trying to create the real surprise feeling, because when the real thing comes, it's not scripted, it's not scheduled. I get that, but when it comes to doing the drill, there's always the option of getting advance notice. And and in a way you're kind of building bridges between the student and the school, because school teachers and school administrators and school personnel, they probably hate the sounds of the alarms as much as anybody. But I understand that it is a state, there are state laws that require you to practice school safety drills x amount of you know x number amount of years, times a year. So and then Unicorn Children's Foundation, who I'm a member of the board of directors. Our CEO recently came on, was recently interviewed about you know active shooter drills and its impact on special education students, and the possibility of maybe using alternative language that that includes um, you know like using different language to describe, certain drills, like instead of, run hot, instead of, like using strong language, like, um, alert, barricade, confront. Maybe it's more of, along the ranks of run, hide, and and just and if necessary, you know, confront the attackers. So I mean, it's more about using the advanced. It's more about using, kind of, sugarcoat, sugarcoating, how we explain drills, but not really, not really just trying to not, but not trying to deter the purpose of the drill. It's more about taking that baby steps approach to these drills, and you know and convincing schools that the student is not trying to get out of the drill. It's just very bothersome that we're just trying to soften the impact of it. I mean, an analogy I use is, in the movie Twister, 1996 film Twister, that they're not trying to, not trying to, kill tornadoes. They're just trying to create an advanced warning. The characters are trying to create an advanced warning system that gets people, advance notice to, take shelter when, the state, this, like in the film, the state alert system for tornadoes is 3 minutes, but the characters are trying to, try to get a warning time to 15 minutes. And that's the way that's how I approach school safety drills in that regard, is to give, advanced warning, and in that way that the student can be better prepared mentally, and that's how they, and if they do that, then they'll have a much more smoother, transition. Sure, they may, be frightened at first, but it's really about softening the blow.
I like that. Changing the language. I like that. Um, have you always been a leader, and you've taken very much a leader advocate um, role? Have you always been this way? Have you always been a leader and confident and leading the charge?
Yes, actually. Well, yeah. I mean, I've obviously, been, I've learned from the experience of being on the, uh, you know, I mean, I've had experience of, confronting school safety, what goes on with, school safety drills, being on the autism spectrum, transitioning, all those things. So I've, by, sharing my experience, I've sort of become a leader in doing what I do as an advocate and public speaker, because I think a lot of, I think today's generation of teachers, parents, and even students can benefit from my story, and the other and others in the community like myself. So
I totally agree, and I'm grateful that you're doing it. I don't um, know that everybody can step up and do it the way that you're doing it, and so we thank you for that, because we need what you're doing. And how did it start? How did you start becoming an advocate and working with the schools?
well, it's kind of funny, but for 6 years I was a member of what is known as the Brony fandom. And for those who don't know, Brony means a fan of My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. And for 6 years, I would go to what is known as Brony conventions. And at Brony conventions, it was more about the code was love and tolerate. And I, and among the lessons that I learned from, Friendship is Magic and the Brony fandom is, about diversity, about equality, about inclusion, and also about, building friendships and connections. So when Friendship is Magic ended in 2019, I took what I learned from the show and the fandom and incorporated it into the autism and neurodiversity self advocacy that I do now. So so and of course, and the other reason, the other thing that I was inspired to become an advocate was I have two nieces, one who just started kindergarten and another who just turned two, and I'm trying to set an example for them that they're going to be growing up among people who are neurodiverse or have a disability, and I want them to kind of get an understanding that they're going to that this is how that's how the world is going to work, is there's going to be people different than them, and I want them to be accepting of who they are, of who people are as individuals. So
I love that. So what's next on your list that you're looking to add to your life, your repertoire, your
well, I did found my own blog and business called Going the Distance. I've owned it since I created it in May of 2021, and it serves as the hub for my advocacy and my public speaking services. I do a blog. I do blogs every week. As of this recording, I have done 273 blogs, with my 274th coming out tomorrow. And I also contributed to the book, This is Autism, which is available on Amazon.com for $19.97. It is written by Jessica Leitwise and Aidan Allman Cooper, and I am one of the contributing authors to the book. So again, it's available on Amazon.com for $19.97. And if you would like me to sign, if you want me or one of the contributors to sign you a copy at a future in-person event, please let one of us know. We'd be happy to sign you a copy.
How cool! How cool! Before I forget, when we finish the show here, if you can email any links to your blog or website or anything, we can put it in the show notes for people who want to reach out and get in touch with you.
Certainly, I will do that.
That'd be awesome. And then, I've really enjoyed this conversation. We're kind of running in on time here. What do you say to the parents out there with a newly diagnosed child? What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing I would probably say to them is, just remember you are not alone. And the good news is there's plenty of resources available now than when I was first diagnosed in the 1990s. There's plenty of autism, neurodiversity, disability organizations that have evolved and grown in the past 30 some odd years that autism really became a thing. And there's plenty of like there's a lot of neuroscience resources that parents can turn to. And the key factor is, the strong factor is, advocate for your child. And if you can't advocate for if you don't know how to advocate for your child, find, look to someone that, has the experience of being, on the spectrum, and, just someone that knows what it's like to go through the autism diagnosis and growing up on the spectrum. And then also then there's the matter, and another factor is don't seek out professionals that say oh, you got to be cured of autism and all that and garbage like that. It's Autism is something to be accepted and embraced, and just something that should not be viewed as anything but, shouldn't be viewed as a disease or anything like that, because it's not. It's a neurological condition. And the key factor is, and another thing is, always view autism as the blessing and more of the blessing and less of the curse. That's my advice to parents. And
I love that. I love that. I think I've really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show today. I think that's the perfect place to leave it, is autism's to be celebrated. And I'm grateful that you share that with us today. And I hope you stay a friend of the shows, and I'd love to touch base down the road and just kind of hear what you're up to.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Link so we can learn how to get in touch with you. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.